I believe that one of the most hazardous positions we can take whenever we're trying to come to a decision with somebody else about something is that there's one position that's right and there's one that's wrong. And my job, of course, is to convince you that I am right and you are wrong. And that is your position as well. For some people where both have strong personalities. If one person's really super easygoing, uses their myth, tricks, and other evasions real effectively, because it's not like any of us have no personality or have no opinions about things. Some people put up with not having an opinion for years and years and years, and so then somewhere down, a gunny sack, like is described there, an old burlap sack, if you take pieces of garbage and as that kind of anger is, and you keep throwing it in there, well, what happens to garbage after a little while? It spoils and then continues to rot. And what happens to the burlap that it's in?
It rots.
It erodes and it rots. And then what have you got suddenly one day? A mess. And that's what I've seen an awful lot of, because one person's been putting up with it, not having an opinion, not having an opinion, I said that wrong, not speaking their opinion, and just trying to accommodate, and finally the bag breaks. So let's just take that notion of right and wrong and throw it out the window, okay, when we're talking about settling a disagreement. Now, exceptions. Of course, every rule has an exception. Sharon and I are sitting in a restaurant. This has not actually happened. This is an example. There's one waitress. We have completed our meal. I say to Sharon, she's back in the waitress is back in the kitchen picking up somebody else's order. I say, let's leave and not pay the check. See if we can get out of here with a free meal. If she disagrees with me, we are having an argument over right and wrong. Okay? Tell me what percentage of, if you're married or been married, what percentage of your arguments are about that kind of right and wrong? Close to zero, right?
Yeah.
Close to zero. Because probably you agreed on some real fundamental values going into it. It's all the peripheral stuff that we get into fusses with each other about. And so if we don't call it right and wrong, if we throw that model out the window, and that model, by the way, looks like this. If I give 3 reasons for why we should do this thing my way. These are good, solid, kind of lawyerly brief kinds of evidence for why this is the right way to do it. Then your job, if you are in disagreement with me, is to match me, right? You've got to come up with 3 reasons for why your way is the better way. And of course we have this unwritten rule between us that whoever has the most best reasons, they ought to get their way, right? Isn't that just logical? Okay. So we're here at 3 and 3, and so I crank out a 4th one. And sometimes it's a pretty far reach, isn't it? You've said things in arguments that you really don't even believe yourself, but you put it out there because it supports your opinion, right? So then you, not able to come up with a 4th one, decide to begin attacking my arguments, okay? If you're going to do that, I guess I can attack your arguments and show you how foolish you think he is, okay? And then where it gets really serious and really ugly is if I can't think of good ways of attacking your arguments, what do I do next? I attack you, okay? And like I said, that's where it gets very unpleasant, very ugly, very hurtful. And in the relationships that we want to have with people, again, be it boyfriend and girlfriend, husband and wife, 2 just really good friends, being part of a community, whatever the relationship, there's no room for that. There's no room for that. That's not necessary. So we have to find something else. But first we need to maybe understand where our preferences came from. And I've spelled them out here so you don't have to tediously write. How I or my family always did things or labeled them is one of the preferences. And again, you see, I use the word preference, not evidence, okay? Not sound arguments. It's what my preference is. So, Sharon and I are dating, getting pretty serious. She owns a house, and we're inviting her family over for Thanksgiving. And I, wanting, of course, to be helpful, suggest that I will make the mashed potatoes, because I used to do that at home, and so I can handle that one. So I proceed to begin peeling the potatoes and getting the pot on the stove to boil. And as I'm peeling the potatoes, Sharon says, "What are you doing?" I said, "I'm peeling the potatoes." "Why would you do that?" "Well, because that's how you make mashed potatoes." Okay, you hear that? That's how you make mashed potatoes. That's how you make mashed potatoes. All right. "No, it's not," she says. And in her family, they would just cut up the potatoes, skins and all, throw them in the pot and boil them, and then run a mix master through for about 15 seconds. So you have this grayish, brownish, lumpy mass of potato stuff. Okay? Certainly doesn't qualify as mashed potatoes, right? Now, I know this, I picked funny examples. That is a real example, isn't it? I pick funny examples, and they're funny at this distance. Trust me, it was not funny as it was going on. Okay? Because we were in that position in our relationship where we're obviously jockeying for, we always said we really needed to find a car that had a steering wheel in the middle of the front seat, right? So we could share control. And that's what this kind of stuff is about. So, in my family, you peel the potatoes, you boil them, you mash them thoroughly with the old-fashioned masher so that they were just paste, and then, of course, you threw in the milk and the sour cream. Sour cream, and you had this fluffy mass of mashed potatoes, the real mashed potatoes. Okay, again, funny, but not funny when you're in the middle of it. Okay, what or how it's supposed to be. Okay, again, we have ideas about, I was raised in the Midwest. She was raised in California. We're in Pasadena, okay, looking for a Christmas tree. So we go, of course, onto a Christmas tree lot. I look, and again, being raised in the Midwest, at this Scotch pine. I said, "There's a pretty tree." She said, "Well, it's a nice little bush, but it's not a Christmas tree." I beg your pardon. See the sign? Christmas trees. This puppy is not growing out of the cement here. Okay? They brought this in because it's a Christmas tree. And the condescension in my voice was there. Okay? Even now, as I say it, it was awful. Because I did have a very solid idea about what was right and what was wrong. And she was clearly off track here. She turns around and points to a fir or a silver tip or something. He said, "That's a Christmas tree." Okay, so you see what I mean. We have these ideas of what things are supposed to be, and we defend them to the nth degree. All right. Third is personal taste. Okay? Some people like country, and some people like rock and roll. Okay? That's just personal taste. That sets our preferences. There isn't a right or a wrong kind of music. Our basic temperament. I don't know how many of you have taken classes in things like Tim LaHaye years ago did spirit-controlled temperament, and he defines 4 basic temperaments. It's an old-fashioned Greek idea from thousands of years ago. The Greeks had the notion that our basic temperament was determined by the fluids that were running around within us. And so some people were sanguine as blood. They were kind of high energy people. They're the quintessential salesmen. They're just very verbal and very people oriented, you know, and then there was the phlegmatic. Imagine that, phlegmatic, that comes from phlegm, right? Disgusting thought. But unfortunately, the best kind of temperament to have as well. And phlegmatics are pretty easygoing and again, very people oriented. They don't care if a job gets done, they just want everybody to be happy. And there's the choleric, okay? And they, you know, they're the doers. They get things done. People get in their way, they get crushed, and then they keep going and get the task done. And then the melancholic, who's the kind of chronically depressed. Okay, so those temperaments set our preferences. We've guided our life. We've determined our life by these you know, by these preferences that we have and our personality, our basic personality style. And then male and female ways of viewing the world, and I won't get into the discussion about whether it's simply cultural training or something biological, because I don't think that's important. The fact is, men and women do approach many things differently, and they are simply that, different. Unless, of course, you were raised in a situation where the male way of doing things and the logical is superior to the female way of doing things. Okay? You can't do that. It doesn't make sense. I don't care if it makes sense. It's what I want to do. How can you say that? Okay? That's a tough one. All right. So these are the things that set our preferences. If we're and then down below I've got the two models of conflict resolution that I'm talking about, and I've already described the win-lose. The other is more creative. And the more creative way of handling a conflict, now let's go over to that next page, that second page in your handout, is to look at how to manage that anger when there's a difference. Okay, when you're at odds with somebody. And so I start this out by describing what I call 5 rules of fair fighting. Okay, and again, it's based on the assumption that we're not talking about right and wrong here. We're talking about we just approach this thing differently, and how are we going to do it? Okay. First one is stick to the point. Stick to the point simply means when you start talking about, do we need a new washing machine? You stay with it until you change the subject only with mutual agreement. Okay, we can't come to a decision about this. We need to table it. But the main point here is to stick to one topic at a time. And here's the reason. It'll reveal to you if you're having this old-fashioned win and lose kind of argument, that if I'm about 6 points ahead of you, then you figure that if I keep going with this discussion, I might have to give in. And I don't know about you, but that's close to one of the last things on my list of things to do in my life. Okay, okay, let's say this is me, so what I'll do is I'll simply change the subject. Just right in the middle of the conversation with no logical connection whatsoever, I start talking about this. And by the way, this is is something that I know I've got a lot of good arguments about. So all of a sudden you find yourself talking about this other topic over here, and you're down. Well, what's the smart thing for you to do? Change the subject, okay? So now we talk about 2, 3, 4, 5 things, and I'm willing to bet, for those of you who've been in long-term relationships, I'm willing to bet that that you have come to a point in some of those disagreements where you honestly can't remember how this all started. Okay, that's good evidence. You're not sticking to the point. Okay. Second. No bringing up the past. Okay? A friend's past misdeeds are not fair game for discussion. Again, it's a tactic. I'm 6 points ahead, and you remind me of when I did this wrong. And by the way, this is, these are indefensible sins, right? These are not speculative. These are, if you've been with me for a while, you know where they've blown it. And so you remind them of that. And that time. Oh, and what about this time? Okay? And the idea, of course, is to break them down personally so that they aren't standing so firm in their position. Now, and then the next phrase says, use previous experience to shape what you want. And I'll come back to that in just a little bit. But no bringing up to that. Now, does this mean you can never talk about the past? Absolutely not. Okay? This is in the middle of an argument. And an argument, I simply mean a disagreement over some decision you're coming to. Okay? So this is because there are times when things from the past are very important to talk about. Okay. By the way, I'm rolling along fast. I can hear myself doing it. If you've got questions, let me remind you to flag me down and ask the question while it's still in your mind. Third, no verbal or physical abuse. Okay. Let's start with the physical abuse first. No non-affectionate touching. Okay. Weird way of saying it, isn't it? But you see, I've worked with my share of batterers, none of whom will ever acknowledge that they are physically abusive. Oh, I just shoved her. Let's look at this hospital report. Where? Out of the third-story window? Okay, nobody gets these kinds of injuries from being just shoved. Okay, so non-affectionate touching blankets all those phony excuses. If you are not touched with affection, that's physically abusive. Okay? The verbal assaults are more common. It's as it's listed here. Assaults on the other person's intelligence, mental health, moral character, and of course any kind of name calling. Okay? All of that's verbal abuse. And it just doesn't have a place in an affectionate relationship. Respect each other's emotional beltline. In a physical boxing match, there's a physical beltline, right? Marks off that area of a man's body that's so sensitive that if he takes a shot there, he's down. Okay? Can't continue. Well, emotionally, we have some of those issues too. Some things that we feel very sensitive about. And when a person tosses one of those at us, we may just, like a boxer, drop to the floor. And if the other person, if they're the only one standing, then guess they get their way because you stopped arguing. But then you got to watch what happens down the way, because they will come back on you for that. So we just need to identify and eliminate those kind of beltline issues. Classic example. Most of the examples I choose put me in a shady light, but this was such a classic that I was I don't know what I was doing, and this was very early in our marriage. And Sharon said, "You ignoramus." And what she didn't realize, first of all, that's not high on the scale of things that could be said about a person. And it didn't personally threaten me from the standpoint of thinking of myself as ignorant. We met while I was in graduate school. But it was my mother's favorite term from my father. I heard that so many times, I can't tell you, and I hated it. I hated the put down that implied. And the cork came out, the top came off. And so she learned that day a beltline issue. You just don't use that kind of language. And it helped us, it helped us develop some of these rules, and it But it can be anything. About a man, it can be his ability to provide for his family. About a woman, it can be something about her physical characteristics. I mean, there's all kinds of beltlines out there, and you just, sometimes you have to help your partner understand when they have said something, or again, a friend. It's not just in the context of marriage, but even friends will, if they get extremely mad about something, will, you know, and if they know you well, they might pick something that you're sensitive about. And we just have to be really, really careful about that. And certainly identify them if it comes up. And the last one says avoid sarcasm. You know, there's nothing the matter with teasing. Teasing in a family, or even amongst a group of friends, is very natural and healthy to an extent. The problem with, in the middle of an argument, is there's already tension in the air, and so the teasing, which is what sarcasm is, actually sarcasm is hostility with a humorous facade over it. Sometimes I call it the velvet-covered fist. You know, it looks very pretty, but it hurts just as bad. So, again, in the middle of an argument, I said, teasing outside is certainly acceptable. It brings off some of the little annoyances of life, things, you know, Sharon can't stand it. I mean, you're using a toothpick. I'm just a rabid toothpick user. And it just makes her crazy to see me, especially if I'm talking and that little puppy's jumping up and down. And you know, she'll do all kinds of things. She'll sneak up behind me and snag it out of my mouth, or sometimes I just get the eyes. I start talking to her. I'm not even aware of it, of course, and I just get this look. Oh, that means toothpick. Or I come in with one behind my ear. Oh, that's a fashion statement. Anyways, the idea of the rules, I often say, is like it's like the out-of-bounds lines on a football field. You know, you can cross the goal line 50 times, but if you're out of bounds as you do it, no points. Right? Nothing effective about doing something out of bounds. The rules help define the boundaries. Okay? They sort of help you know, are we having a good disagreement or not so good? And I often say to people, the purpose of this is to check how much in control you are. You know, you don't talk to a 2-year-old in the middle of a tantrum, right? You just don't do it. You just trundle them off to their room for a little while, let the steam out, and then when they're calmed down, you can have a discussion with them. In fact, the more you try to talk to them, usually the more upset they get, the more upset they get, the more upset you get, and it's not a pretty thing. So you just let them be. Well, as adults, we have tantrums too. Okay, we may not throw ourselves on the floor and kick and scream. We may, but we're just as far out of control. And adhering to the rules just keeps us in check. That we're having a good discussion. We're talking about what we need to talk about. And what we need to talk about is down there at the bottom. How do I feel and what do I want? I mean, really, when you think about all the things that have been eliminated here, it is, sometimes I've presented this to couples and they've sat there kind of dumbfounded and said, well, you've just taken away all the good stuff, so now what are we supposed to say? Okay, because that constitutes most of what we do when we disagree. Well, let's start talking about how you feel. But remember, you can't blame somebody else for how you feel. We had that discussion last week, right? You can't blame somebody for how you feel, but you own it. What do I want? And then, as I always say, and the cruel reality of growing up is recognizing, I don't always get what I want. Okay? And yet, when two people can do that, whatever whatever the disagreement's about, when two people can do that, you begin formulating in your head, okay, is there a solution here that we can both live with? In this example this morning, I hadn't even thought about this. Now it's happening so automatically, I have to laugh. But in that situation this morning where I sort of got bushwhacked by this family, I learned it doesn't do any good to be defensive. Just tell me what's going on, what's going on, what's going on. And when it all peeled away, Mom wanted to know something very specific. She needed a very specific detail about something. And once I heard that, I said, oh, so you need to know that I'm going to keep it that anonymous. But and as soon as I said that, you could just feel the room shift. Because usually when people are arguing, it's because there's something very important to them that they want. And now, if it's something I can provide, great. If I can't, well, what can we do in the middle? One of our early discussions, my wife is very neat. I am not. She comes into my office here in town and she walks in, she says, if I was depressed and I looked at your desk, I'd be more depressed. But around home, she likes to have the counters clean, tidy. Okay? I mean, she's not a fanatic with the Lysol, she just wants them tidy. I, on the other hand, like to read the mail. And in her opinion, if a piece of mail sits there for 4, 5, 6 hours, it's starting to rot. And it's really bugging her. And it would really bug me. And again, in the time distance, that's, this is funny. It's not funny at the time. I want to know what's coming into the house in the mail. That seems like a very reasonable request, doesn't it? Sure. In case you didn't back me up on that. And as silly as this sounds, once we started hammering this out, what we came to is, she's perfectly happy putting it either on my sink in the bathroom or on the back of the toilet tank, because I have no problem sitting there and reading things. She would have never thought of that as a possibility, because that grosses her out to think somebody would sit there while they're, okay. So, but doesn't bother me, okay. So then she gets clean counters and I get to read my mail. Simple. And yet, unless we're in this spirit of compromise, we don't come to that, okay? Because we're just arm wrestling for justifying why I have the right to see the mail and her justifying why she has the right to have clean counters.
I have a question.
Sure.
What happens when one of the parties in conflict does not and will not play by any rules? What do you do?
Well, that's a pretty dangerous situation, frankly, because there are people, and sometimes they're labeled rageaholics who don't play by any rules. There's no holds barred. If we're in disagreement, just get yourself ready, put on the pads, and then then you've got to think about how close you want to be to that individual. That's my 40-yard rock thrower.
Because it can be passive also.
Right.
The same kind of thing. Maybe I'm walking out.
Right.
I'm not going to talk to you.
I'm not going to talk about it. Right. And that's there's not much chance for a very healthy relationship. Mm-hmm. You might go on, you endure that, but it's not grounds for a good healthy relationship. Okay. So if one or both, now I'm kind of in the bottom third of the page, right in the middle. If one or both can't stick within the rules, what do we do? because that's what people ask. You know, what happens if somebody doesn't stay within the rules? Well, understand that anybody can walk away from an argument without being chased. Okay? What I mean by that, and that's physically or verbally. Okay? Because you can chase somebody across the house with your voice. Don't we know? And so, if you have that agreement that we're going to call a timeout, okay, anybody can walk away. And sometimes you need to announce what you're doing. I need a timeout, not you're breaking the rules, but I need a timeout. Okay? I need a timeout. It's one of those you said you weren't supposed to do. I need a timeout, okay? And that you can walk away without being chased. The second portion of that is if you walk away, you carry the responsibility to come back to the topic sometime in the next 24 hours. You know, some of us get hot really quick and then cool down just about as quick. Some of us do this slow burn. But when we hit our peak, it takes a while to get back down. And so that's where the 24-hour thing came in. And I know certainly people ask me from a biblical standpoint, well, wait a minute, what about this business about not letting the sun set on your wrath? Well, what that really means is not letting things go too long, because obviously it's ridiculous. If you start an argument at 9 o'clock in the morning, you probably have time to talk it through before the sun sets. If it starts in the summertime at 8 o'clock or 8:15 or 8:30, well, now, yeah, the sun's heading down. You know, so obviously it can't mean that. It can't be that literal, don't let the sun set on your wrath. But it does mean sometime within the first 24 hours. And truthfully, there are times, innocent though I may look here, there are times when 24 hours doesn't get it. The best I can choke out is, I know we still have to talk about that, but I'm not ready. Okay? But you have to acknowledge that we've got unfinished business. Okay? But the first priority is having the discussion when everybody's under control. Question?
Well, and when you're gone for that 24 hours, it's important what you're cycling around in your head.
Good.
So,
Yeah.
I just want to...
That's a very good point, because hopefully what's going around in your head is, how do I really feel about this? What's important? What's so important to me about this? And then to begin to identify what you want in some detail. You know, I sometimes use the analogy of a couple is going to go buy a new car. Okay, one wants a Ford and the other wants a Cadillac. Whoops. Where are we going to stop on the street to look at this? Okay? To look at cars. Well, one has to identify the aspects of the Ford that are important to them. The top things that are important to them. That's in that 24 hours. That's where you get some time to think. The other person has to identify the aspects of the Cadillac that are important to them. They may settle on Pontiac. Not a choice, notice, that either of them would make, but one that incorporates the finer points of what this person wants, and not the finer points, but the top points, and the top points of what this person wants. And so the choice is a Cadillac. Now some people say, compromise is a lousy idea. Well, my friends, I submit that compromise, I like alliteration, is the cost of companionship. You want to live your life just the way you want to live it, you may. They got some caves in the hills outside of Oroville that you can live without respecting or worrying about anybody else's feelings or anybody else's rules. Right? But if you want to be in companionship, then compromise is a necessity. It's either that or one person will dominate continuously until the other person gets fed up. Now, I said I would come back and then we really need to stop because I'm holding me over here. The no bringing up the past, okay? Sometimes the past is relevant. If we're having a disagreement over something that we disagreed with before, and I have, and my track record is not good in this area, then the past is relevant. Okay, how is it relevant? Let me give you an example. We moved to Napa. We spent some time looking for housing. Now, like most everything else, Sharon and I had very different ideas about housing. I really care about the setting. I like something a little more private, a little more off to itself, or at least in the case of this one house we began looking at, because she would parade me through all these houses, and we'd no sooner turn onto the block than I'd, kind of drop my head, and, she didn't bother stopping sometimes. She could see the reaction was so strong. And so we pull up in front of this one house, and I just break into this big grin, because it's in a neighborhood, but it's an older neighborhood that has, and so it has trees and bushes on 3 sides of the property. I mean, the backyard was like a park. It was unbelievable. It was only, I don't think it was full half acre. It wasn't that big a piece, but just the way they had landscaped it and everything, it was totally private. And I just walked through the house. And as I walked through the house, my smile got bigger. And she hated the house. She hated the house. And I said, honey, we'll make any changes in this house you want. No questions asked. So, 12 months later, fast forward, you can count on that finger the number of changes that have been made in the house. And that was done by her father when he came up for a week of vacation. Okay. So, translated, I welched on the deal, big time. Okay, well, my wife is somebody who likes change. I often joke that I'm lucky to have made it 37 years. She really likes change, and so we were looking for probably our 3rd or 4th house in Napa in a 11-year period of time. She would move every other year, just loves, but she hates redoing other people's decorating. So she likes something new. So we pulled up to this one house, which again now had a nice setting, a nice private setting. But she said to me, this house has no personality. Now, I guess I'm just a dumb man. I always thought a house was a place to keep you warm and dry. I never understood this concept of personality in a house. But I said, okay, honey, okay, but we can, you can add personality to it. You can do what you want. Now, it would have been the perfect time. And with every right in the world, she could have said, yeah, right. Welsher. Don't you remember Broadmoor? That's the name of the street. She didn't say that. I guess we had talked about this enough that she said, I'd be willing to consider this house. As long as when you borrow money, you borrow enough to put $30,000 into an account in my name. Slick, okay? See, rather than hitting me over the head with my history, it modified what she wants, which is what I say it here. Use previous experience to shape what you want. Okay? And fortunately, we were in a position where we could do that. We were in that upswing or whatever, the growth of California properties that the house we had moved into matured enough that we could put that $30,000 in, and so she got an account and she put $30,000 worth of personality into that house. Now, being one who, by the way, specializes in helping people with their personalities, I've yet to see somebody spend $30,000 on their personality. Yeah. But that was fun, and it serves as a great example of how we use that previous history to shape what we want. Okay, thanks for your attention. I won't hold you anymore. But if you have questions, feel free. And if you need to leave, leave, and anybody who has some questions,
I gotta go.
go ahead.
I gotta go pick up Jeremiah. Yeah, I'll be back next week.
Well, anxiety, fear can trigger anger, but, and anger can be transformed into anxiety. So some anxiety conditions are the result of suppressed anger. And so anxiety coming out as anger, because the person doesn't want to own anger, it manifests in anxiety. So that's a kind of a cycle.
How about